"Oh God, the Aegis system is dead," the duty officer shouted as USS Independence drifted helplessly in the middle of the electromagnetic storm. The radar was blind, Russian hypersonic missiles were screaming straight toward the ship, and every sailor knew they had less than a minute left to live. In the chaos, a woman quietly pushed her way to the control station. Not a senior officer, not a famous commander, just a silent technician, the one who had been dismissed and looked down on for months. But as a flash of fire lit up, her shirt tore open, revealing brutal war scars across her back, marks of years of torture no one could even imagine. And just as everything seemed about to end, she placed her hand on the console and spoke a code word no one on the ship had ever heard. Who was she really, and why did the Russians call her Valkyrie? The North Atlantic sky boiled as an electromagnetic storm spread across the waters like an invisible curtain, shredding every radar signal and paralyzing communications. On the bridge of USS Independence, screens that once glowed bright now flickered in chaos. Urgent voices overlapped, tangled with the shrill wail of alarm bells. Hypersonic missiles, launched from a Russian Yasin-class submarine, tore through the air at blistering speed. The Aegis system, the pride of the U.S. Navy, should have locked on and countered in an instant. But today, there was only silence. Red icons flashing across the screens, marking a total system collapse. The crew scrambled in panic. Some clung to emergency levers, others hammered frantically at keyboards, desperate for a solution. But nothing could stop the truth racing toward them. In less than a minute, this 9,000-ton ship would be reduced to drifting scrap, and 500 sailors would be ash scattered across the ocean. Amid the chaos, a female figure emerged from the line of technicians, small, quiet, unnoticed. Chief Petty Officer Ray Whitaker. For 6 months she had been nothing more than a name on a maintenance roster, silently tightening bolts, loading missile rounds, wiping away grease. To the crew, she was nearly invisible, a shadow in the corridors no one bothered to greet. But today, that shadow lunged straight toward the main console. A young officer tried to block her, shouting, "You're not authorized to be there." But Ray said nothing. Her fingers moved as if they had memorized every line of code, every layer of security. In seconds, she slid into an override panel supposedly reserved for senior command. The control room froze. As an explosion rattled the hull, Ray's shirt tore at the shoulder. Emergency lights spilled across her skin, revealing a map of scars. Deep knife gashes, mottled burns, long jagged lines, etched like memories into flesh. These weren't random wounds. Anyone who had ever faced Spetsnaz or GRU knew this was the signature of war torture. The terrified stares around her began to shift. No longer contempt, but the dawning realization that they were standing beside something dangerous and hidden. Ray didn't stop. She keyed in a sequence, bypassing the disabled system entirely, then entered a code no engineer in the room had ever seen. A dry mechanical clank echoed. Launch tubes opening. One interceptor missile armed manually, bursting from the deck like a blazing sword cleaving the storm. The air on the ship froze as 2 streaks of light, one from Russia, one from USS Independence, speared toward each other, and then a blinding explosion tore the sky apart, splitting the storm into a sea of fire. The shockwave hammered the ship, but it held. The threat was gone. For a few seconds, silence. No one breathed. No one dared believe they had survived. And not because of billion-dollar systems, nor battle-hardened commanders, but because of the woman dismissed as a shadow, a maintenance worker revealed with the scars of a ghost warrior. On the command deck, Captain Mitchell stared at her. Amid the wailing alarms, he could only mutter in disbelief, "What the hell are you?" Ray lifted her head, her cold gaze reflecting the crimson emergency glow. In her eyes there was no invisibility, only the look that had once led comrades through hell. The look of a SEAL who had survived torture, betrayal, and fire. And then, The ship's loudspeakers roared, cutting through everything. Urgent transmission. Russian submarine requests to speak with Valkyrie. All right then, my dear viewers, if you're watching and find this story gripping, drop a comment with number 1. Or write, I'm still here to keep listening. The next morning, as the gray Atlantic still heaved with waves left by the electromagnetic storm, an unusual silence hung over USS Independence. The crew passed Ray Whitaker with glances that were half curious, half wary. For 6 months she had been invisible, just another maintenance worker no one noticed. Yet, in a matter of minutes, she had done what a billion-dollar system could not. Still, Ray kept the same posture. Eyes down, shoulders hunched, calloused hands quietly gripping a wrench and toolkit. In the maintenance bay, grease stained her nails as she inspected each lever and launch system as if nothing had happened. Young sailors stole glances, whispering. But when her eyes flicked their way, they turned instantly, pretending to be busy. For Ray, that look was familiar. She had endured enough stares of suspicion, fear, and betrayal to know silence was the best armor. But this silence was also a burden, pressing on her chest each night as nightmares dragged her back to Syria. In the darkness of memory, hot sand lashed her face, gunfire hissed past her ears. The Navy's first female SEAL unit, 10 women, stormed a compound in Aleppo during Operation Iron Dagger. The mission: rescue CIA personnel held inside a disguised nuclear facility. Ray was the commander. Valkyrie, the code name her team spoke with reverence. Everything erupted like a storm. They broke the prison, pulled the hostages out, but when the support helicopters arrived late, Ray ordered the hostages aboard first, her unit staying behind to cover. Bullets filled the sky, comrades fell one by one. When she fired her last round, the shadows closed in, and then nothing. She hadn't died. The Russians, led by Korovin, had captured her alive. He didn't want her dead. He wanted information. For 11 months, she was kept in windowless cells, drowned in water, starved, beaten, until her body was a map of scars. Knife cuts across her back, cigarette burns on her hands, each wound a reminder that she must stay silent. And she did. Not a code, not a plan, not a single secret slipped. But when a joint task force finally rescued her, she was little more than a hollow shell. The Navy did not welcome a soldier back from that darkness. They feared her. In the official record, Ray Whitaker was listed as killed in action. No uniform, no funeral, no medals. A dead soldier was far easier to explain than one who lived against orders. Now, aboard USS Independence, Ray was only a chief petty officer, tasked with wiping grease. The crew whispered that she had screwed up, crossed the wrong people at the Pentagon. They didn't know, and didn't care, that every scar on her skin carried the story of a unit that had died entirely so she could stand here. Colonel Morrison was different. He watched Ray from a distance, through the frame of the deck hatch, as if he had spotted what the others missed. A man seasoned in covert operations was not easily fooled. When he saw Ray hoist a 3,000-pound tomahawk round with uncanny precision, he knew instantly that wasn't the motion of a maintenance worker. That was the muscle memory of a warrior who had done it hundreds of times under the shadow of death. One morning in the gym, Ray stripped off her jacket to wrap her hands. Dim light spilled down, revealing scars slashing across her shoulders and spine. Morrison, silent in the corner, exhaled heavily. He knew those marks too well. Spetsnaz work. Wounds not meant to kill, but to carve pain into the marrow. He said nothing. But when their eyes met for a moment, Ray understood. Morrison had recognized her. Not a technician, not a shadow. But Valkyrie the SEAL, declared dead on paper, alive in the dark. The rest of the day, Ray worked as if nothing had changed. But that night, alone in her barren Spartan berth, she opened a steel locker that had remained sealed for months. Inside, among a few personal items, lay a combat dagger wrapped in cloth. On its blade, faint words etched, "For the fallen." She touched the cold steel, closed her eyes. The faces of her teammates flickered before her, then scattered like dust on the wind. Over the intercom, the metallic voice rang out, "Attention all senior officers. Command briefing at 0800. Ray tightened her grip on the dagger. Tomorrow morning, when she stepped into that room, her past would have nowhere left to hide. And before we continue the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like on this video. Oh, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. That morning, the command room of USS Independence glowed with the dim blue of tactical maps. Senior officers gathered around the display table, where red blips crept slowly across the screen, 3 Russian warships holding formation at the edge of international waters. Admiral Pierce stood tall, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't unusual. The Russians often test our reaction. We stay on course. No provocation." Heads nodded, sailors trying to mask their unease. But Morrison, silent at the far end of the room, frowned. He'd seen this pattern before. 3 ships, a perfect triangle, funneling a target into a kill corridor. This wasn't patrol. It was a hunt. Across the room, Ray leaned against the wall, her eyes sharp on the screen. She knew Morrison had seen it too. No words were needed. A single glance between them was enough. The enemy hadn't appeared by chance. They were here for her. The radar's long beep shattered the tension. A new signal surfaced, a Yasin-class submarine rising from the depths, its black hull looming like a predator. No more silent surveillance. This was a declaration. "Urgent transmission from the Russian vessel," the comms officer stammered. "They want to speak to the true commander of this ship." Pierce stepped forward. "Patch it to me." But the speakers crackled, a heavy Russian voice filling the room, clear as if the man himself stood among them. "USS Independence. We are not here to speak to you. We are here for Valkyrie." The room froze. Every officer's head turned almost in unison toward Ray. She stood motionless, every muscle taut. That name, the code name she had buried, the name her teammates had shouted with their dying breath, now spoken by the enemy, slicing into her memory like a blade. Korovin. Only he would know. Her mind dragged her back to the Syrian cell. Damp air, the stench of rust and dried blood. The man with steel-gray hair, eyes cold as ice, resting a veined hand on a dagger. "The Americans call you Valkyrie," he whispered as the blade cut her skin. "The goddess who chooses the survivors. Let's see how long you survive." 11 months. 11 months of scars her body would never erase. And now his voice returned, echoing across the bridge. "Valkyrie, we have unfinished business. Last time you left without an answer. This time, I'll have it, or I'll take the blood of 500 souls on this ship." Captain Mitchell turned to Ray, his face torn. He had seen her as an anonymous technician. Now he was forced to face the truth. She was the target the enemy hunted. "Can you explain this?" he demanded. Ray didn't answer. She straightened, squared her shoulders, her eyes shifting from avoidance to command. A transformation played out before everyone's eyes, not a technician, but a SEAL once known as Valkyrie. Morrison broke the silence. "They're not hunting the ship. They're hunting her. The question isn't what, it's who." Pierce ordered the line cut, but Korovin's voice struck one last time, like a hammer blow. "You have 1 hour, Valkyrie. Show yourself, or USS Independence becomes a coffin for all aboard." The channel died. The room thickened with silence. Every eye locked on Ray. She drew in a breath, eyes closed for a heartbeat, as if holding back the ghosts of her past. When they opened, her gaze was cold steel. There was no retreat left. "Admiral, Captain," Ray said slowly. "He won't stop. And if you want to survive, you'll need me in tactical command." The wail of the red alert throbbed like the ship's panicked heartbeat, each shrill pulse drowning the crew in chaos. On the radar, a bright streak cut across the Black Sea, racing straight for USS Independence. In less than a minute, steel and fire would meet in an explosion no one could survive. Through the turmoil, Ray stepped forward, her frame taut, shoulders squared. No official orders, no ceremony. She claimed the space as if she had never lost that authority. Calloused hands slid over the console, cold eyes scanning the data. The crew faltered, recognizing the rhythm in her movements. Not a nameless technician, but a warrior forged in hell. The missile closed in, the ocean thrashing beneath the hull. Ray's fingers flew across the keys, entering a sequence most junior officers had never seen. Subsystems lit up, hidden protocols buried deep in classified manuals, flashing alive as if forbidden memories had been awakened. The main defense grid was still dead, but under her command, secret doors opened. The bridge fell silent, broken only by the whir of fans and the insistent radar beeps. Ray linked dormant circuits, forcing the crippled SM-3 system into manual. Beside her, a sailor stared as indicator lights shifted from red to amber, then to green, like witnessing a miracle. Her body was strung tight as wire, sweat trailing down her spine, dripping onto the cold steel console. Scars showed beneath her damp uniform, proof of a past now fused with the breathless urgency of the present. Outside, the storm-lit sea shimmered with each vibration, as if her old wounds were being torn open again. The enemy warhead knifed through the wind, its trajectory sharp as a blade. Ray struck the launch key. A shudder ripped through the ship as the tube opened, hurling the one surviving SM-3 skyward. Its fiery trail tore across the night, a blazing scar slashed into the dark. The crew held their breath. On radar, the deadly chase unfolded. Two streaks locked together, one relentless, the other desperate. The moment stretched into eternity until a white flash split the heavens, the explosion booming like a salvation bell. The shock wave slammed through the hull, joints groaning as if to burst. Then silence. The threat was gone. For a heartbeat, the crew erupted. Shouts, clapping, release surging through the air. But Ray remained still. Her eyes weren't on the sky they had just saved, but on the tactical screen where three red dots, the Russian ships, held their calm formation. Patient, predatory. Behind her, a sound broke the relief. Ray turned just in time to see Wallace, the intelligence officer, step out of the shadows. In his hand, a printed directive, an arrest order for Ray Whitaker. No announcement, no debate, only the cold steel of his gaze and the will behind it. The room sank heavy. Cheers died into stunned silence. Ray stared at the paper, her face unreadable. She was no stranger to betrayal by those she saved. But this time, it was plain. Washington didn't want her to fight. Washington wanted her locked away, silenced like a dangerous secret. Morrison stepped forward, his stance still carrying the weight of old uniforms. He didn't need words. A single look told Ray where he stood. Mitchell froze, torn between the order from above and the truth before him. The ship had been saved by the very woman they were now told to chain. Ray lifted her head, spine rigid, her eyes tempered steel. The alarm still pulsed, a reminder that the enemy had not withdrawn. Time left no room for politics. The choice loomed clear. Obey Washington and surrender Valkyrie, or trust the one who had just pulled them back from death. In the strobing lights, Ray's shadow stretched long across the steel wall, fused with the shape of the ship, as if she were its very backbone. A warrior once erased from memory, now holding the fate of hundreds in her hands. And everyone in the room knew. The order from land was nothing more than ink on paper. Real command now belonged to a ghost Valkyrie. The night sea heaved, the faint crescent moon slicing across the water like a cold blade. USS Independence surged forward in the suffocating silence, engines thundering like the strained heartbeat of the entire ship. In the distance, massive shadows clung close, 3 Russian warships forming a tightening ring, while the Yasin loomed ahead, surfacing like an iron gate no one could break through. Inside the command room, the bluish glow of tactical screens washed over the crew's tense faces. They had just witnessed a miraculous intercept, but the thrill had already soured into a heavy dread. At the center, Ray stood like a steel pillar, her gaze drilling into the digital map, dissecting every small shift of the enemy. Her body still trembled faintly from the strain of the last moments, but her mind was sharpened to a merciless edge. A static crackle burst from the speakers, shattering the silence. Over the radio came a gravelly voice, heavy with mocking chill. Korovin called her name, Valkyrie. A single word, yet it thickened the air across the ship. The crew glanced at each other, some swallowing hard, some gripping their seats tighter, all realizing the enemy out there didn't care about them. He wanted only the woman at the center, the one they had once ignored. Ray froze, eyes flickering as memories slashed back like blades. The cramped cell, the stench of rusted metal, boots pounding on concrete floors, the blinding glare of interrogation lamps. 11 months of skin peeled layer by layer, will broken piece by piece. And still he was here, the torturer turned hunter at sea, calling her by the code name her teammates had given her before they fell. She clenched her fists, forcing her breath steady, rising tall as if she had never faltered. Her body betrayed her with a faint tremor, but her eyes were forged steel. In that instant, Ray felt another gaze drilling into her, not from the sea but from behind. Wallace stood silent, his face calm to the point of coldness, his hand tightening on the folder he carried. The bold red letters stamped across it burned clear. Elimination order. Ray didn't need to read it twice to understand. He wasn't just the messenger, he was the executioner. 2 jaws of the trap closed in, one from the sea, pressing her to step into the open before the world, one within the ship, ready to break her from behind. Time dragged on, each second heavy as lead. Korovin's voice kept cutting through the comms, each demand echoing across the bridge. 1 hour to surrender, 1 hour for Valkyrie to appear, or the ship would become a drifting coffin of twisted steel. The crew heard every word, and slowly realized their fate now hung by the thinnest thread woven through the woman at their center. Ray lifted her eyes to the screen, tracking the enemy's formation. Everything was precise. The Russian ships held perfect spacing, moving in sync as if playing a giant game of chess. They weren't in a hurry. They knew cornered prey always shows itself. They knew the ghost called Valkyrie could not hide in the dark forever. Beside her, Morrison stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. He had seen this kind of hunt off the coast of Cuba, had known too well that the enemy didn't want to destroy immediately, but to strangle slowly, forcing the target to surrender in despair. He said nothing, only tilted his head slightly, a silent message. Trust your instincts, not the orders. Inside Ray, her heartbeat pounded. She knew this choice was no longer hers alone. The whole ship, hundreds of lives, were being pulled into the hunt. If she stepped forward, she might save them, but she could also turn them all into hostages. If she stayed silent, Wallace would strike first, Washington would shackle her, and Korovin would have his excuse to annihilate the fleet. She walked slowly toward the main screen, her boots striking the steel floor in steady beats. Each step felt like treading on her own memories. The blue glow lit her face, highlighting the scars running down her wrists, glimpsed beneath her collar. There was nothing left to hide. The crew watched in silence, every gaze locked on her. They had once thought of her as a shadow drifting through corridors, an invisible woman among the decks. Now they saw a leader made of flesh and blood, someone who had survived to pull them back from the edge. Out there, Korovin waited patiently. In here, Wallace gripped the order tighter, his resolve unshaken. Ray stood between 2 crushing forces, between the torture of her past and the betrayal of her present, between an open enemy and a hidden foe. The sea roared outside, white waves slamming against steel, like the voices of fallen comrades crying out. Ray drew in a long breath, each scar on her body burning alive again. There was no retreat. She knew the moment of choice was closing in, and once she made it, the world itself would change. Her name echoed over the radio waves. The cold arrest order lay within the ship, and hundreds of lives hung suspended on the tip of a missile. How would Valkyrie stand when both enemy and ally sought to control her fate? The main screen on the command deck flickered, then flared to life. Inside the control room of the Russian submarine, Korovin appeared. He looked older than Ray remembered, but his eyes still cut like steel blades through flesh. A harsh face, a long scar running down his left cheek, hair gray as shattered silver under fluorescent light. He stood tall, commanding, as if no wall existed between him and the American ship. In that instant, Ray felt the air thin out. Memories crashed back like a storm. The stench of dried blood, the rattle of chains, the endless questions repeated again and again. She clamped down on her breath, forcing her body to hold steady. Her eyes never left the screen, never granting her enemy, the one who had once fed on fear, a single opening. Korovin smirked, the smile of a man who knew he held the advantage. He spoke her codename again, each syllable like a verdict. Valkyrie. The sound froze the entire deck, a ritual summoning of a ghost. Ray stood tall, neither denying nor defending. She was silent, letting her presence answer for her. It was acceptance, not as an anonymous technician, but as a buried warrior rising once more. Korovin began his cold negotiation. He spoke of Blackbird, of command codes believed to be locked in her memory. He insisted America had never abandoned the program, that Washington was hiding something capable of shifting the global balance. He laid down his ultimatum. Ray could walk out willingly, or the entire crew would be crushed in the tightening ring. The room was deathly quiet. The crew watched Ray as if she were their only anchor. Mitchell sat taut, his hand gripping the back of his chair. Morrison tilted his head, old eyes burning with fire. Wallace stood against the wall, his gaze steady, not anxious, but like a man tallying up an asset about to lose its value. Ray listened to every word, but her mind ran like a machine. She saw it clearer than anyone. Korovin didn't want the ship. He wanted her, or at least the legend bound to the name Valkyrie. He wanted to turn her into proof for the world, an American warrior subdued or silenced forever to bury the truth. When his voice finally fell silent, Ray stepped closer to the screen. The blue glow carved her scarred face, mapping every wound like a battlefield etched into skin. She answered with a long silence, then with a single line, steady, sharp as forged steel. It was not denial, but the declaration of a survivor. For a moment, Korovin's smile died. Rage flickered in his eyes, the fury of a hunter stunned to see his prey no longer trembling. He cut the feed abruptly, leaving a thick darkness on the screen. No one dared breathe. The silence broke only when alarms flashed. 3 Russian ships shifting, forming a new formation. Another steel trap closing in. Ray understood this was no show. This was the final move. At that moment, Morrison stepped forward. He spoke low, just enough for Ray to hear, that someone on this very ship was working with the shadows. Ray turned, her gaze locking instantly on Wallace. No proof was needed, no confession, his rigid silence spoke for him. The shock wasn't in the betrayal itself, but in where it came from within the Navy's own heart. Ray felt the old wire tighten around her throat. Washington wanted her silent, Korovin wanted her broken, and the crew wanted only to survive. All the jaws of the trap converged. Admiral Pierce watched in taut silence. He had never seen trust unravel so quickly. One wrong move could shatter the fleet, not from Russian firepower, but from division within their own ranks. Ray drew in a breath, every scar burning as if alive, a reminder she had already survived hell. This time would be no different. She didn't waste words, just signaled Mitchell to prepare for a move no one else dared imagine. Outside, the sea roared, Russian ships closing their iron ring. Inside, Ray's eyes blazed like fire against cold steel. She knew the choice had come: obey Washington and vanish, or become the ghost who defied both enemy and ally. On the night sea, USS Defender moved in silence, its hull a steel shadow drifting through the vast darkness. No more flares, no more thunder of enemy engines, only the faint vibration of its own drive and tense faces lit by dim red light. No one spoke, but all knew. The storm wasn't over. The encirclement had loosened, only to tighten elsewhere. Ray Whitaker stood at the end of the deck, eyes fixed on the endless horizon. The sea wind cut across the scars on her skin, reminders they had never truly faded. They were records, a map of a past she once believed buried. Now everything was rising again. Blackbird, Kingfish, Corrigan, Wallace. Names not just of secrets, but of chains that had bound her life. She knew she no longer had the luxury of anonymity. The last 6 months had been nothing more than calm before the storm. Now, every gaze aboard the ship fell on her not as a ghostly technician, but as the only hope in a night growing heavier. Above, the stars glittered, indifferent to the games of men. The sea stayed salty, the wind kept blowing war and conspiracy were fleeting in the span of the universe. But for Ray, the coming moments would decide not only the fate of the Defender, but also the truth, buried for decades. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and let the storm wash through her. When they opened again, only steel remained in her gaze. The next battle was coming, and this time, she would fight not just to survive, but for the justice the past had left unpaid.